Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Wednesday, May 12th, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well today. It's been another very busy day, a lot going on in the news. And the attack on critical race theory and the 1619 Project, the attack from Republicans, the attack from the GOP continues. The attack intensified some today when about 30 House Republicans introduced two bills to restrict the spread of critical race theory and to ban diversity training for federal employees and the military. We see an attack on critical race theory continues in states that have a Republican state legislature. And we see bills have been signed in Idaho, state of Idaho. Governor Brad Little of Idaho just signed a bill back around May 6th to ban critical race theory from being taught in schools. We see that in Tennessee, Tennessee bans public schools from teaching critical race theory amid national debate. We see proposed bills in Texas. The Texas GOP passes bill to stop teachers from talking about racism. This was the Texas House of Representatives. This was Tuesday, May 11th. So we see this attack taking place in this. A lot of this centers around some people not wanting to really teach about history and the history of this country, and not wanting to deal with white supremacy and racism and not teach about white supremacy and racism. And then we see the attacks continue on the 1619 Project as well. So we're going to talk about that on today's show, give you an update on what's going on. GOP is obsessed with lying about critical race theory, and House Republicans announce a bill to ban teaching of critical race theory as more states do the same. Now, you have to ask the question, what are they afraid of? Okay, because, now this ties into Senator Tim Scott's speech that he gave on Wednesday, April 28th, 2021, that a lot of people still don't understand the speech. And that speech was the rebuttal on behalf of the GOP to Joe Biden's speech to a joint session of Congress. The speech that Tim Scott delivered on behalf of the grand old party, on behalf of the Republicans, laid out the Republicans' agenda in the speech. And people still are missing this. When Tim Scott said America is not a racist country, part of what he's talking about is attacking the 1619 Project, attacking the origins of this country, not wanting to deal with systemic racism, not wanting to acknowledge systemic racism, but also deal with this effort to teach a more accurate history of this country, including the role racism has played in this country, including systemic racism. So as I've said before, the most important part of his speech, it was two critical things in his speech that he said. First off, and I'm trying to bring this up here, right after he said America is not a racist country, he said it's backwards. And let me pull this up here just a second here. He said it's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination. That's attacking policies that are being pushed by Democrats, pushed by the Biden administration to address systemic racism. And this specifically deals with the $5 billion in resources and $4 billion in loan forgiveness or African American farmers and non-white farmers that was in the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. And that is to address systemic racism that many Republicans say don't exist. But critical race theory is dealing with an analysis of systemic racism and dealing with teaching it, not to teach people that their parents or their ancestors were white supremacists, but to better understand this system so we can correct these policies. But you have people that don't want to teach that. So you have to ask the question, why? So when we look at this article here from the Washington Post, April 29th, 2021. Senator Tim Scott's comments on race ignited fiery debate. Once again, I've said this a number of times, people still don't understand this speech. And you have a lot of people commenting on this who didn't hear the entire speech. One, don't follow politics. Two, I can listen to them and tell they don't follow politics. The policies that have come out from Republicans, the policies that have come out from Republican state legislatures since April 28th fall in line with the speech that Tim Scott delivered, because that's the Republicans' agenda. So when Senator Tim Scott said, hear me clearly, America's not a racist country, see, part of what he's dealing with, part of what he's talking about is the 1619 Project and critical race theory. The very next line ties into trying to put policies in place to deal with systemic racism. And most of these policies Republicans are against. He said it's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination, and it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. Okay, well, if you don't want to deal with the history of the past and have these conversations in the present, and if you don't want to talk about systemic racism, critical race theory, okay, then at the same time, you don't want to put policies in place to deal with systemic racism, then what is it that you're trying to do? What is it that you're trying to do? Oh, you're trying to get 361 bills passed in 47 state legislatures to make it harder for African Americans and Latinos and Asian Americans to vote. That's what you're trying to do. So then if you look at the if we look at the article from the USA Today, see, all this is connected, and this is what people are missing. All of this is connected. So when we look at this piece from the USA Today, and we look at another portion of Tim Scott's speech, this ties into what's being taught in schools. People are missing this. I'm listening to what people are saying. I can tell they do not understand what's really going on. All these bills that have come out since Wednesday, April 28th from Republicans fall right in line with the speech that Tim Scott delivered. Because that was the GOP rebuttal, and that is the agenda of the GOP. So if we look at this article here, and I once again I encourage people to go watch the entire 6-minute 55-second interview that Good Morning America did with Vice President Kamala Harris Thursday, April 29th, 2021, because I'm listening to what people are saying. I could tell they didn't read her full comments. They did not read her full comments and don't understand the context that all this is taking place is. Okay, if you read this article from USA Today, Kamala Harris agrees with Tim Scott that America not a racist country, but says must speak truth on racism. Read her entire statements, because I'm listening to what people are saying, and I can tell they're missing that also. Here's what Tim Scott said about what's being taught in schools. This is what people are missing. This ties into the attack on critical race theory and the attack on the 1619 Project. Tim Scott said 100 years ago, right here, 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids again are being taught that the color of their skin defines them. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. Which kids are you talking about? Who you talking about? Little black kids being the oppressor? No, you're talking about little white children being the oppressor. The speech, this is in the speech that he delivered that people are missing because they're focused on one sentence and not the full almost 15-minute speech that's laying out the GOP's agenda and the policies that have come out since April 28th when he delivered this speech fall in line with what's in the speech. This deals with the attack on trying to teach a more accurate history in classrooms, and state legislatures are shutting this down. State legislatures controlled by Republicans are shutting this down. So we're going to deal with all this on the other side of the break. We'll talk about the GOP keeps lying about critical race theory. Okay. GOP is obsessed with lying about critical race theory. We'll also deal with the bill that was announced today by about 30 House Republicans in the House of Representatives, Republicans in the House of Representatives, to ban teaching critical race theory. And also it's designed to ban diversity training. Now, it's not going to pass. The bill is not going to pass the House of Representatives because Democrats control the House of Representatives. But this shows you their mindset and intent. And then also on today's show, we'll deal with May 10th. May 10th was the anniversary of the South Carolina Race Riot in 1919 that took place May 10th, 1919, during the Red Summer, the South Carolina Race Riot in 1919. We'll talk about that on today's show as well. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Stand by. Stand by, everybody. We're on commercial break. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast. Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. We'll be back in a few minutes. How's everybody doing? Okay, we got John Ray. We've got Jonathan. Stand by. Back from break in 2 minutes. Stand by. Or y'all can still register for the online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa. Understand the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. It meets on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. I'm going to post a link here. You can register here. As soon as you register, you can start watching the content. You can watch the class we just did last Saturday. It's a 9-week online course that I teach. Stand by. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Wednesday, May 12th, 2021, and we are live. You can give us a call, 313-778-7600. If you have a quick question or comment, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a quick question or comment. I want to remind you that you can still register for the online course that I teach on Saturdays, the new course that started up on Saturdays, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 9-week online course that I teach, and we deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. So I just posted the link here, and it meets Saturdays 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the classes live. All the classes are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. If you miss anything, as soon as you register, you can watch the class that we just did this past Saturday. And we deal with thousands of years of history, what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We deal with ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. We deal with Nubia, Ta-Nehisi, Ethiopia. We deal with the 800-year occupation by Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. And then we deal with what the Moors take into Europe, the teachings from ancient Africa, from the Nile Valley region of Africa into Europe. This is going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages, and we deal with what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay. All right. So you can register for that. It's regularly $130, on sale $80. And all the classes are archived. And as soon as you register, you can also watch the class that I did in February and March of 2021 as well. All right. So let's deal with this continued attack on critical race theory that was foreshadowed in the Wednesday, April 28th, 2021 rebuttal speech that Tim Scott delivered on behalf of the GOP. So there was an article from NBCnews.com today dealing with Republicans announced federal bills to restrict the spread of critical race theory. Republicans announced federal bills to restrict the spread of critical race theory. Congress members have a pair of federal bills to prohibit diversity and anti-racism training in the military and in federal agencies. Okay. So with all that's going on, this is what they're doing. Now, not a single traitorous Republican in the House of Representatives or in the Senate, not a single traitorous Republican voted for the $1.9 million American Rescue Plan to help everyday Americans. But they want to attack the 1619 Project and attack critical race theory. Now, a group of House Republicans on Wednesday took recent attacks on critical race theory a step further by introducing a pair, Wednesday, May 12th, by introducing a pair of bills to ban diversity training for federal employees and the military. By introducing a pair of bills to ban diversity training for federal employees and the military. Okay. Some 30 GOP representatives have signed on to support both the Combating Racist Training in the Military Act and the Stop CRT, Critical Race Theory Act. Okay. Two bills, Combating Racist Training in the Military Act and the Stop CRT Act. Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina said at a news conference in Washington, D.C. Now, the first bill is a companion to the legislation that Senator Tim Cotton of Arkansas introduced that aims to prohibit teaching, quote unquote, anti-American and racist theories. Now, but these same people support the first Russian president of the United States who's anti-American and a white supremacist. See, this is how stupid this is. This is how stupid this is. One of these dumbasses is Marjorie Taylor Greene, the crazy QAnon lady from Georgia, who got stripped of her committee assignments. Now, keep in mind, this the same party that just ousted Liz Cheney today from House congressional chair. Just ousted her for telling the truth that the 2020 election was not stolen from Donald Trump, for telling the truth. They just ousted her. So Senator Tim Cotton of Arkansas introduced a bill in the Senate that aims to prohibit teaching anti-American and racist theories, such as critical race theory, at any academic institution related to the U.S. Armed Forces. The Stop CRT, Stop Critical Race Theory Act works to codify former President, Traitor-in-Chief, Benedict Donald Trump's executive order from 2020 banning diversity and racial equity training for federal employees. Now, this is an order that President Joe Biden reversed in January. Rightfully so. Joe Biden reversed that BS in January. Rightfully so. Now, Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina said critical race theory is a divisive ideology that threatens to poison the American psyche. You mean like the big lie that y'all keep telling? You mean like poison the psyche like that? The big lie that y'all keep telling, that the 2020 election was stolen, and then you have Republicans in Maricopa County in Arizona having a recount with a firm called Cyber Ninjas that don't have a history of doing recounts of elections, and they come up with these crazy conspiracy theories like bamboo from Asia. They're looking for bamboo on the ballots from Asia, or they're using UV lights for watermark, all kind of type of beer. You mean stuff? You mean poison like that? Is that what you're talking about? For Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina said, for the sake of our children's future, we must stop this effort to cancel the truth of our founding and our country. This is, see, you don't understand how crazy some of these dumbasses are. You don't understand how crazy some of these dumbasses are who are elected officials who vote on policies that impact 330 million people. This is what this fool said today. He said, Representative Dan Bishop of North Carolina, he said, critical race theory is a divisive ideology that threatens to poison the American psyche. For the sake of our children's future, whose children are you talking about? For the sake of our children's future, we must stop this effort to cancel the truth in our founding and our country. He said the initial bill stands for the idea that critical race theory does not belong in our armed forces. The Stop Critical Race Theory Act will be the most comprehensive legislation to restrict the spread of critical race theory. Now, this is going to fail in the House of Representatives. Luckily so, because people had enough sense to vote Republicans out of power in the House of Representatives to stop dumbass bills like this. Now, the bills are the latest in a string of proposed legislation from the white nationalist party, because that's what the Republican Party is, and they're becoming more like this day after day. They're the crazy QAnon white nationalist party. This is what they are. This is an example of how elections have consequences. We have to understand political self-defense and self-preservation and vote white supremacist dumbasses like this out of office. So the bills are the latest in a string of proposed legislation targeting diversity and anti-racism teaching. They don't want to teach anti-racism. They want to continue to teach racism. They don't want to teach about the real history of this country. They don't want to teach about systemic racism. What is it that you are afraid of? The bills are the latest in a string of proposed legislation targeting diversity and anti-racism teaching, which is being characterized as critical race theory in several states. Now, most of these people don't even understand what the hell critical race theory is. They just lumping a bunch of stuff in, calling it critical race theory, things that they don't like. We're about to break down critical race theory here in just a minute. We're going to go to clip 1 in just a minute, Shakita. Now, you have bills being proposed and being passed and signed into law by governors, Republican governors, in several states across the country. Such bills in Idaho, Louisiana, Rhode Island, and Tennessee target the teaching of anti-racism in schools. Okay, if you look at this one here from Tennessee, if you look at this one here from Texas, okay, let's see here. Let's continue with this one here. Conservative leaders began focusing on critical race theory after Benedict Donald, the traitor-in-chief, the first Russian president of the United States, Donald Trump, used the decades-old academic term in a September 2020 memo ordering the Office of Management and Budget to stop funding diversity training. This is where what really kicked this off, September 2020. Around the same time, educators were using the Pulitzer Prize winning 2019 New York Times 1619 project. And I had an in-depth discussion with historian Dr. Daryl Scott, who's a history professor at Howard University. We talked about the 1619 project. We'll go watch the video. We dealt with Ava DuVernay's 13 and the myth that the 13th Amendment has a loophole that re-enslaved African Americans. That's not true. 13th Amendment is based upon the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. I did a 2-hour interview with him. That's on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. And, there's some flaws in the 1619 project, but I think there's some aspects of it that you can use in school along with other things and create a curriculum. Okay, I wouldn't bash entire 1619 project. There are some flaws, and New York Times has had to make some corrections as well. But around the same time, around September 2020, educators were using the Pulitzer Prize winning 2019 New York Times 1619 project in the classroom to teach a more holistic history of the country, So Republican leaders began publicly criticizing both the 1619 project and critical race theory, often using the term to describe all anti-racism efforts because they don't know what the hell critical race theory is. Now, I want to go to this clip here from the readout, Joanne Reed. Okay, and on May 11th, there's an article from HuffingtonPost.com. This is about what's going on in Texas. Okay, Texas GOP passes bill to stop teachers from talking about racism. This is from May 11th, 2021. Texas GOP passes bill to stop teachers from talking about racism. Democratic State Representative James Tallarico said it's going to have a chilling effect on social studies and civics teachers across the state. Okay, because people already are ignorant of history in this country. People are already ignorant of history, ignorant of the U.S. Constitution. If you look at this article quickly, then we'll go to clip 1. And this segment of the readout from Joanne Reed is actually in this article here from the Huffington Post. But it says Republicans in the Texas House of Representatives passed a bill on Tuesday that effectively bans public school teachers from talking about racism, white supremacy, or current news events. Republicans in the Texas House of Representatives, now the bill has not been signed into law yet. It looks like Republican Governor Greg Abbott is going to sign the bill into law. Surprise, surprise. But Republicans in the Texas House of Representatives passed a bill on Tuesday, May 11th, that effectively bans public school teachers from talking about racism, white supremacy, or current news events. The bill, which is being fast-tracked to Republican Greg Abbott for him to sign it into law, states that social studies and civics teachers are not allowed to discuss the concept that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Oh, you don't want them to discuss white supremacy? Well, if you don't discuss it, how the hell you fight against it? Quote, and they don't want them to discuss that, or the idea that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. Oh, you don't want to discuss reparations? You don't want to discuss it. So let me how do you correct the wrongs of the past? The policies that are put in place right now that maldistribute wealth, power, and resources into the hands of Europeans. How do you correct that if you don't want to discuss it and teach the history of it? Explain that to me. How do you correct it? Now, this dumbass bill from the House of Representatives in Texas also states that social studies and civics teachers, quote, may not be compelled to discuss current events or widely debated and currently controversial issues of public policy or social affairs as part of a course. So you can't discuss current events like the killing of George Floyd. You can't discuss events that there was systemic racism or things like this, current events. You don't want them to discuss this in school? I want to go to clip one. See, once again, I'm trying to explain to people, you don't understand the speech that Senator Tim Scott delivered on behalf of the GOP. All this stuff has come out since that speech because that speech foretold the policies of the GOP. This is an example of why elections have consequences, and politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. You don't understand how crazy these people are. This is why I'm listening to people, they focus on one sentence out of a 15-minute speech. And that wasn't even the most important thing that Tim Scott said. What he said, the next sentence, that was devastating. Because the next sentence was, it's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination. And people talk about, so today on Roland Martin Unfiltered, and I'll be back on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday. I'm a panelist on Friday. A Representative Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, because Roland was broadcasting from Texas, and Representative Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas, she was talking about a number of bills that Democrats are trying to get pushed through the Senate because they've already passed them in the House of Representatives. Okay, because it's like 200, I think it's like 219, 220, because a Democrat just won Cedric Jackson's seat in Louisiana, so it's either 219 or 220. No, it's up to it's more than 220. It's more than 220 in the House. It's 221. It's 221. I think it's 221 in the House now. 221 Democrats in the House, and you need 218 votes to get any bill passed. So she was talking about the negotiations between Democrats, especially the Congressional Black Caucus, and Senator Tim Scott, who's negotiating the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act on behalf of Republicans. Senator Tim Scott is negotiating on behalf of Republicans. The sticking point is qualified immunity, meaning that the law that police officers cannot be sued directly if they unjustly kill somebody, okay, like in civil court, qualified immunity. You need 60 votes in the Senate to get the bill passed. So people are saying, oh, Democrats need to learn to play chess, not checkers, all this stuff. No, you don't understand. You need 60 votes in the Senate to get this bill passed. People don't understand. You need 10 Republicans to get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed. This is what Representative James Clyburn was explaining, and people don't understand what he's saying. Representative James Clyburn said in Washington Post had an article, D.L. Hughley posted some stuff on Instagram. D.L. don't understand this. I looked at what D.L. said. I like D.L., but he doesn't understand this. Clyburn is saying, if we can't come to an agreement on qualified immunity, that doesn't mean walk away and don't get the rest of the other things in the bill passed. You get the rest of the other things in the bill passed if you can't come to an agreement on qualified immunity, then you come back to qualified immunity later and try to get it passed. You don't walk away with nothing. The reason why is because you need 10 Republicans in the Senate to vote for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act with or without qualified immunity. You got a better chance of getting it passed if qualified immunity is not in there if you can't come to agreement. I don't think they're going to be able to come to an agreement because Senator Tim Scott is more progressive on police reform than most Republicans in the Senate, and he's against repealing qualified immunity. This is what a lot of people don't know. Senator Tim Scott is more progressive when it comes to police reform than the majority of the Republicans in the Senate. You don't have 10 Republicans in the Senate to vote to repeal qualified immunity. If you think you do, name me the 10 Republicans in the Senate who you think are going to vote to repeal qualified immunity. It doesn't exist. Clyburn is smart enough to know that. Most people commenting don't know this. They don't understand this. Not only that, what a lot of people don't understand is that you are one heartbeat away in the Senate from Mitch McConnell being Senate Majority Leader again. You one heartbeat away in the Senate for Mitch McConnell being Senate Majority Leader again. You know why? Because you got about 7 or 8 Democratic senators in states that have Republican governors. If something happens to one of these Democratic senators, some of them are old, some of them in their 70s, 80s, if they have to resign because of health reasons, if they pass away in office like Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, okay? Do you realize that a Republican governor can put a Republican in that Democratic Senate seat, and now the U.S. Senate flips 51-49, and Mitch McConnell is back Senate Majority Leader? He gonna shut down most of this stuff, if not all of it. Clyburn knows that. So Clyburn like, look, you got to push this stuff through now. If we can't come to an agreement on qualified immunity, you need to get this bill passed and get this other stuff passed. He's smart enough to know that. Most of the people commenting don't understand any of this. Let's go to this clip, Shakita. Now, this is from the readout, Joanne Reed, MSNBC, and she's talking about the GOP is obsessed with lying about critical race theory. Let's go to this clip. Take it off mute. Start it from the beginning, take it off mute.
Or introduce vague legislation that prohibits critical race theory or divisive concepts, whatever that means. It's fairly hypocritical for the party that freaks out about faux censorship and cancel culture to cancel an idea that they just don't like. But why let logic get in the way of their culture wars? Just yesterday, the Tennessee General Assembly banned teaching critical race theory in that state. And Arizona is on its way to doing the same, threatening to fine teachers who are already underpaid $5,000 if they break the law. None of this should shock you. Why would the Republican Party want to have a factual conversation about race, gender, and equity when their most pressing issue today is pushing the big lie? Joining me now is John Meacham, presidential historian and host of the Fate of Fact podcast, which I'm excited about. And John, you know, Nicole Hannah-Jones, of the Behind the 1619 Project, she tweeted a series of quotes by W.B. Du Bois, which I thought were so spot on. I can't quote them, but I'll paraphrase them. That history is one of two things. It's either information or it's a palliative to sort of create, you know, patriotism and make people feel good. To me, American history has been taught as the latter. All of my adult life and way long before that. Why do you think people are freaking out so much that people want to teach it as accurate fact?
Yeah, I will say this as a native Tennessean and a resident of the state, you know, 1925, we decided to not teach another theory called evolution. And that didn't work out very well in the long run. So whenever the Tennessee legislature gets into trying to ban free speech and the exploration of new ideas, we should be very wary. Look, it's possible that the pendulum, the spectrum for informed, reason-based conversation could be out of whack, but it's been out of whack on the prevailing white narrative for more than 2.5 centuries. So the fact that critical race theory and the 1619 Project are part of the conversation now is, in fact, what the founders wanted. right? The American Revolution was not least about giving reason a fighting chance in the arena of ideas and governance with appetite, ambition, and passion. You know, I believe, and that a lot of folks don't, but I believe that America fundamentally was an Enlightenment era project. It was attempting to take the world from being organized vertically, where popes and princes and prelates and kings, who either by an accident of birth or an incident of election had reflexive authority over all of us, to turning into a more horizontal one, where in fact we all had the individual capacity to determine our own destinies. You and I know, and everybody listening knows, that that was not complete, that was an aspiration that was not fulfilled and has not been fully fulfilled even unto this hour. But the greatness of the country is not that there's some static moment where we take our story and our reality back to. The greatness of the country is that we have the capacity to use reason and conscience and history and faith to build a more perfect and better union. And there are a lot of folks who think that the union is inherently corrupt. I don't believe that any more than the union is corrupt insofar as human beings are corrupt. And, you know, we have a debate going on here that's not unlike the 1850s, when William Lloyd Garrison burned a copy of the Constitution and said it was a pact with the devil. And Frederick Douglass said, no, there is no soil as conducive to the growth of reform as American soil. And, you know, Douglass is a fascinating figure, and like all vulnerable people, thought different things at different times. But that's where we have to be, is that this is an ongoing struggle, and you should not be banning and shutting down conversations that you find uncomfortable.
Okay, pause right there. Pause it right there. Pause it right there. Pause it right there, Shakita. Thank you. All right. Now let's very quickly here. Stop the clip. All right. So I want to look at this here. Stop the clip, please. Thank you. All right. I want to look at this here. HR 1280, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. This is at congress.gov. If you want to track bills, you want to see what's in the bill, you can go to congress.gov. Okay. This is in the 117th Congress, George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2021. And let me see something here. Okay. So very quickly here, because people ask, well, what's in the bill besides qualified immunity? The bill addresses a wide range of policies, and I'm trying to get it to come up without the highlight here. Just a second here. Let's try it this way. And pull it up at congress.gov. HR 1280. HR 1280. Okay, here we go. And this passed the House of Representatives March 3rd, 2021. So let's look at this. Okay, hold on. Because people don't understand what Clyburn is saying. I understand exactly what James Clyburn is saying. He's saying, look, you don't have 10 votes in the US Senate to repeal qualified immunity, because you're gonna need 10 Republicans. You don't have 10 Republicans. If you think you do, name me the 10 Republicans. The bill addresses a wide range of policies and issues regarding policing practices and law enforcement accountability. It increases accountability for law enforcement misconduct, restricts the use of certain policing practices, enhances transparency and data collection, which is extremely important because it's not mandatory to submit to the FBI. There are approximately 18,500 police departments across the country. When you look at police shootings and you look at police killings, police officers killing, civilians. It's not mandatory that police departments submit to the FBI that data on police killings. That's not mandatory. That's voluntary. So you don't have a complete picture of it. The probably most complete, the most accurate database on that is from the Washington Post. It's called Fatal Force. So I look at Fatal Force periodically. There's approximately 1,000 to 1,100 people killed each year by police. Majority of them are white. That a lot of people don't, that gets left out also. African Americans are disproportionately killed, but the majority of them, there are more white people killed each year by police than African Americans. Now that doesn't make it to the news a lot. I'm still waiting on the body cameras and dash cam footage and cell phone footage of white people being killed by police to be shown repeatedly on cable news and to flood our timelines on social media, because there's more video of white people being killed by police than African Americans. But anyway, it increases accountability for law enforcement misconduct, restricts the use of certain policing practices, enhances transparency of data collection, and establishes best practices and training requirements. The bill enhances existing enforcement mechanisms to remedy violations by law enforcement. Among other things, it includes the following: lowers the criminal intent standard from willful to knowing or reckless to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct in a federal prosecution. That is extremely important right there, because when you deal with federal investigations like the federal investigation taking place in the Breonna Taylor case, the only thing they could prosecute police officers for is violation of somebody's civil rights. That's at the federal level. Okay, you have to prove willful intent. You have to prove that the officer willfully intended to deprive someone of their civil rights, which is a very high standard that you have to meet, and that really goes to state of mind. If you can lower it from willful intent to knowing to being reckless, okay, from willful to knowing or reckless, if you can lower that standard, you can get more convictions, more justified convictions. Okay, so that's extremely important. Now, it limits qualified immunity as a defense to liability in a private civil action against a law enforcement officer, and it grants administrative subpoena power to the Department of Justice, in pattern or practice investigations. It establishes a framework to prevent and remedy racial profiling by law enforcement at the federal, state, and local levels. It also limits the unnecessary use of force and restricts the use of no-knock warrants, chokeholds, and carotid artery holds. The bill creates a national registry, the National Police Misconduct Registry, to compile data on complaints and records of police misconduct. It also establishes new reporting requirements, including on the use of force, other misconduct, and routine policing practices. What Clyburn is saying is like, look, if you can't report qualified immunity, don't walk away with nothing. Get this other stuff passed. Come back later and get qualified immunity passed separately. That's what he's saying. He's correct. You don't walk away with nothing. You one heartbeat away in the Senate for Mitch McConnell being Senate Majority Leader again, and McConnell will shut all this stuff down. We're out of time here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. Keep watching on Facebook and YouTube. We'll talk about the Red Summer 1919 in South Carolina. Thanks for tuning in to the African History Network show. Sorry for the calls we couldn't get to. Call back tomorrow night. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace. Stand by. All right. If you like this type of information, also support the African History Network, because you're not going to hear this type of information other places. Okay, Roland Martin Unfiltered, yes, but a lot of other places you ain't gonna hear this type of information. They're not gonna go through, show you this information, give you the sources, break it down for you. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network. $ the AHN Show through Cash App. $ the AHN Show through Cash App. Also through PayPal, paypal.me / the AHN Show, paypal.me / the AHN Show. Let's see here. We're going to post this here. This is HR 1280. Okay. Bill HR 1280. This is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. There's a lot in this bill. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know, what's in the bill. If you want to track bills, you want to find out what's in a bill in the House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, go to congress.gov. Congress.gov is where you can track bills. Okay, you could track the progress of the bill. You can find out what's in a bill. Congress.gov. Okay, and just search for the title of the bill. All right, now, so we have this going on with this attack with critical race theory. We were talking about the article here from NBC News. This is from Wednesday, May 12th, 2021. Republicans announced federal bills to restrict the spread of critical race theory. Okay. And then we were talking about this right before the break. So, and this continues the attack on critical race theory and the attack on the 1619 Project. And this is what Senator Tim Scott alluded to in his speech, the GOP rebuttal, Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. This is what he alluded to. Okay. Now, so Republican leaders began. The attack on critical race theory really started in a September 2020 memo from Donald Trump. Conservative leaders began focusing on critical race theory after Trump used the decades-old academic term in a September 2020 memo ordering the Office of Management and Budget to stop funding diversity training, Around the same time, educators were using the Pulitzer Prize winning 2019 New York Times 1619 Project in the classroom to teach a more holistic history of the country. So Republican leaders began publicly criticizing both the project and critical race theory, often using the term to describe all anti-racism efforts. Okay. Jonathan Chisholm, assistant professor of history at the University of Houston, downtown, and co-editor of Critical Race Studies Across Disciplines, previously told NBC News, many that are condemning critical race theory haven't read it or studied it intensely. Most of them don't know what the hell they're talking about. Many who are condemning critical race theory have not read it or studied it intently. This is largely predicated on fear, the fear of losing power and influence and privilege. This is largely predicated on fear, the fear of losing power and losing influence and privilege. This all ties into the browning of America. The browning of America and the fear that some white people have, not all white people, but some white people have, that by the year 2043, white people will no longer be the majority population in this country. Okay. And some of them are scared to death of that. Okay. And they don't want to talk about systemic racism. They don't want to talk about white supremacy. They don't want to talk about the maldistribution of wealth, power, resources. They don't want to talk about the history of slavery. They don't want to deal with none of that stuff. The larger issue that this is all stemming from is a desire to deny the truth about America, about racism. That's what this is tied. This is what this is about. Okay. Now, critical race theory is a concept that seeks to understand racism and inequality in the United States by exploring and exposing the ways it affects legal and social systems. Now, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. The school of thought of critical race theory was founded by academics, including Derek Bell, Alan Freeman, Richard Delgado, Kimberly Crenshaw, and others in the 1970s and 80s, and builds on critical legal studies and radical feminism. All right. Now, I want to go to, okay, so read the rest of this article here from NBC News. Republicans announced federal bills to restrict the spread of critical race theory. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back from the break, I want to go and revisit an interview that Dr. Mark Lamont Hill did with Dr. Imani Perry from Princeton University, and she's an expert on critical race theory. And she, in this interview, she broke down what critical race theory is. Then also, I want to look at an article from CNN.com. It's a really good article that breaks down critical race theory as well, because most of these Republicans talking about it have no clue what it is they're talking about. Okay, what critical race theory is and isn't. What critical race theory is and isn't. We'll visit that in just a minute. There was an article from the Grio.com that talked about James Clyburn. You can check out this article. It seems like the author of the article really didn't understand what Clyburn is saying, but there was also one from the Washington Post. I totally understand what Clyburn is saying, and I encourage people to go through and read the summary of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and you can understand this. Most people don't know these other things that are in the bill. They just hear qualified immunity. Okay. Clyburn, qualified immunity does not need to be part of the police reform bill. Okay, what he's saying is, he's not saying we don't want to repeal qualified immunity. He's saying if you can't come, they have to come to an agreement on each part of the bill, each component of the bill. If you can't come to an agreement on qualified immunity, you don't walk away with nothing. Pass the other things that are in the bill and come back and then try to pass qualified immunity. That's what he's saying. He said if we don't get qualified immunity now, then we will come back and try to get it later. But I don't want to see us throw out a good bill because we can't get a perfect bill. I don't want to see us throw out a good bill because we can't get a perfect bill. He's absolutely correct. Because once again, I can't stress enough. You're one heartbeat away in the Senate from Mitch McConnell being Senate Majority Leader again, and McConnell is against all this stuff. All right. So we'll be back in a few minutes watching the African History Network show. Stand by. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Gain knowledge in minutes from insightful summaries of progressive and socially conscious books. Blacklisted gives you access to curated content that'll satisfy your curiosity to learn and understand different perspectives. Empower yourself through inspirational and actionable ideas. It's easy to read or listen to on the go. Blacklisted. Empower yourself. Start your free trial today.
Are you getting ready for fall or winter? We have the solution for all seasonal clothing needs. Kemeticwear.com is the go-to online source for Kemetic African fashion and lifestyle products with a contemporary twist. We're committed to offering unique styles reflecting our African heritage. Kemeticwear.com is inspired by KemeticScribes.com to influence our people in learning and showing pride. Please visit our website at KemeticWear.com.
We all know the cannabis industry is headed toward an uprise in the past decade. What happens when there is a brand that brings this uprise in a blow? The cannabis industry welcomes her uprise. Hustle her hemp. Delivering excellence with pride is her watchword, and how you choose to embrace it makes it a priority. From cultivating rich cannabis into exquisite and tastefully finished CBD products to delivery, Hustle Her Hemp leaves no stone unturned. Hustle Her Hemp's mission is to empower women of color by building business and creating legacies, uniting beauty, health, and business. We are a pure definition of how we want the CBD industry to become in the future. While we are redefining innovation, we bring the same energy to improving the quality of life. Hustle Her Hemp is the new Uprise.
Hi, I'm Joel Wilson, President and CEO of JCW Computer Consulting LLC, a technology implementation firm with over 20 years of satisfying customers. We offer a full spectrum of industry top-tier branded services. We are an authorized partner or reseller for Lenovo, Zoom, T-Mobile, Microsoft 365 and Surface tablets, Google Workspace, Acer, Asus, Samsung, PCmatic security software, and many more. Our online store features laptops, Chromebooks, computers, printers, accessories, and software. Businesses, take advantage of our free 1-hour Zoom tech consultation and know we offer top nationwide high-speed internet service providers, voice over IP, and cellular phone services. Home users, don't miss our current in-stock Chromebook inventory. Please visit us at jcwcc.com or call 215-879-6701.
All right. Welcome back to the African History Network show. So some people are saying, well, why didn't the Asians have to come back with the anti-Asian hate bill? They got what they want. First of all, anti-Asian hate bill, go read the damn bill. It's an entirely different bill than the Justice and Policing Act. 1, 2, as I talked about a couple of days ago on the show, when you deal with the let's pull this up right quick. Because the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is a much more comprehensive bill than the anti-Asian hate bill. It's a much more comprehensive bill. It does a lot more than the anti-Asian hate bill. This is what I'm saying. You have to go read these bills. Then you understand the complexity of it. Let's see. The bipartisan vote was the first legislative stop Asian hate. The Senate overwhelmingly approved legislation on Thursday aimed at strengthening federal efforts to address hate crimes directed at Asian Americans amid a sharp increase in discrimination. The bipartisan vote 94-1 was the first legislative action either chamber of Congress has taken to bolster law enforcement's response to attacks on Asians. By passing the bill, the Senate makes it very clear that hate and discrimination against any group has no place in America, said Chuck Schumer. By passing the bill, we say to the Asian American community that the government is paying attention to them, has heard their concerns. The measure, sponsored by Senator Mazie Hirono, Democrat of Hawaii, would establish a position at the Justice Department to expedite the agency's review of hate crimes and expand the channels to report them. It would also encourage the creation of state-run hate crime hotlines, provide grant money to law enforcement agencies that train their officers to identify hate crimes, and introduce a series of public education campaigns around bias against people of Asian descent. The legislation will next go to the House. It passed the House also. Okay, go read this bill. This is an entirely different bill. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is a much more comprehensive bill. This is an entirely different bill. Read this article here from the New York Times. Go to congress.gov, search for the anti-Asian hate bill. It's an entirely different bill. It already passed the House, already signed into law. So you can go to congress.gov and actually read these bills, read a summary. Be able to read the whole bill. Some bills are 200, 300, 400, 900 pages. You can read a summary of the bill, get a better understanding of it. No, they're not attempting to wipe out the Justice and Policing Act. No, these are two entirely different bills. The Justice and Policing Act and the Anti-Asian Hate Bill are not related. They're two different bills. Two totally different bills. All right, let's continue. I'll also read this article here from the Washington Post. This is a better article than the one from the Griot. Rep. Clyburn says qualified immunity does not have to be part of policing reform bill. Read this full article. This is from May 9th, 2021. This goes back to what I was saying. We went through and I showed you the components of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So you can read all these bills and a summary of them at you can read a summary of them at congress.gov. Okay. All right. Let's continue here. Okay, I want to look at I want to go and we're going to go to the clip from the Black News Channel in just a minute here. But before we go to that, let's look at a more comprehensive definition of critical race theory. So there was a good article from CNN.com. What critical race theory is and isn't. May 10th, 2021. Okay. Critical race theory, you may be hearing those three words a lot these days. Lawmakers in Tennessee and Idaho have banned its teaching from their public schools curriculum, while parents in Texas are opposing a school district's efforts to combat racism with lessons in cultural awareness seen by some as critical race theory. Now, it's a concept that's been around for decades and that seeks to understand and address inequality and racism in the U.S. The term also has been politicized and been attacked by its critics as a Marxist ideology that's a threat to the American way of life. To get a deeper understanding of what critical race theory is and isn't, we talked to one of the scholars behind it. Okay, so they talked to, I think this was Kimberly Crenshaw. Yeah, Kimberly Crenshaw. So what is critical race theory? Critical race theory recognizes that systemic racism is part of American society. Systemic racism is part of American society and challenges the beliefs that allow it to flourish. Now, a lot of Republicans don't want to acknowledge that systemic racism exists. Lindsey Graham was one of them. And then you had former Attorney General William Barr under the Trump administration. While he was Attorney General, he said systemic racism in policing does not exist. Now the other thing that I think people fail to realize is that a lot of Republicans are endorsed and supported by police unions. This is why none of them are for repealing qualified immunity, because they get a lot of support from police unions. And a lot of police unions don't want to repeal qualified immunity. You're dealing with an entirely different dynamic here. Which is another reason why Clyburn is saying, look, if we can't come to an agreement on qualified immunity, don't walk away. Get this other stuff passed and then come back and try to get qualified immunity passed later. Now, critical race theory is a practice. It is an approach to grappling with a history of white supremacy that rejects the belief that what's in the past is in the past, and that the laws and systems that grow from that past are detached from it. The laws and systems that grow from that past are detached from it, said Kimberly Crenshaw, a founding critical race theorist and law professor who teaches at UCLA and Columbia University. Now, see, you have a lot of these Republicans, they just want to leave the past in the past. They don't want to They don't want to teach about the history of racism. They don't want to deal with systemic racism. They don't want to deal with slavery. None of this stuff. Okay. And then also, if you look at what's so deep, this article here dealing with Texas. In Texas, I didn't even get to this point. Let me flip over here before I forget about it, because I made notes on all these. In Texas, we go back to this article from Huffington Post. Texas GOP passes bill to stop teachers from talking about racism. If we go down to page 3 of the bill, the legislation passed the Texas House of Representatives 79-65, largely along party lines. Okay. Democratic State Representative James Tallarico said the bill is written in kind of a clever way. He's a vocal critic of the bill. He said you can talk about race in the classroom, but you can't talk about privilege or white supremacy. It doesn't outright ban talking about race, but the idea is to put in landmines, so any conversation about race in the classroom would be impossible. Well, see, now, this is what people have to understand here. He said you can talk about race in the classroom, but you can't talk about privilege or white supremacy. The problem is not race. The problem is racism. We have to make a clear distinction between the two. The problem is not race. The problem is racism. Race is the stratification of humanity into different groups based upon geographical origins, based upon phenotype, hair texture, things like this. That's race. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy for the purpose of preserving genetic white survival. The conversation that needs to be had is not about race, it's about racism, which is the power structure. We have to make a clear distinction between the two. Because a lot of times people get confused about this and they say, oh, like this statement here. Now, State Representative Tallarico probably knows this, but there are going to be people who read this article that don't really understand the difference. He said you can talk about race in the classroom, but you can't talk about privilege or white supremacy. It does not outright ban talking about race, but the idea is to put in landmines so any conversation about race in the classroom would be impossible. The real conversation that has to be taught and the history that has to be taught is about racism. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, benefits, privileges, land, access to education, access to opportunity, healthcare, media, jobs, etc. And they use this to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people, including the court system, the racism, control of the court system, control of state legislatures, control of the federal government, all that stuff. And they use this to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. This is racism. That's different than race. So we have to be clear on what it is that we're talking about. Now, the legislation also states, now this is hilarious right here. Pay attention to this. The legislation also states in Texas that teachers don't have to take professional training classes like cultural proficiency and equity training. They don't have to take these trainings if it makes them feel any discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress, end quote, because of their race or gender. This is in this bill from the Texas House of Representatives. The legislation also states that teachers don't have to take professional training like cultural proficiency or equity training or maybe diversity training. They don't have to take this training if it makes them feel any type of discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race or gender. Damn, they wouldn't survive being black for like 24 hours if they're going to suffer from psychological distress from just reading about this stuff. I mean, I can't stress enough how crucial the state legislatures are. Because the state legislatures are passing these crazy bills. They're passing voter restriction bills, and they're passing bills dealing with what can be taught in school and what can't be taught in schools at the state legislature level. These are Republicans doing this. So, Texas State Representative, Democratic State Representative James Tallarico said, idea is to whitewash American history of any legacy of racism and white supremacy. The idea is to whitewash American history of any legacy of racism and white supremacy. He's correct. The scope of this bill is very broad and is going to have a chilling effect. Is going to have a chilling effect on social studies and civics teachers across the state. Read the rest of this bill. Now, just as various organizations organized, Black Voters Matter, things like this, just as various organizations organized to put pressure on corporations to speak out against the 361 voter restriction bills and 47 state legislatures that Republicans are pushing. You may have to get corporations to put pressure on state legislatures and governors when it comes to nonsense like this. This is ridiculous. This right here is ridiculous. They do not want the real history or even something remotely close to the real history taught. Don't want to deal with racism and white supremacy and systemic racism and things like this. This is why this study from the Southern Poverty Law Center is so important. I think every school district across the country should use this study from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. And I reference it when I teach my online class as well. In this, it's about a 52-page study. It documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in schools all across the country, the consequences of that, and then it lays out a number of recommendations to more correctly teach the history of slavery. You can get it from splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center, splcenter.org. Just search for Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Okay, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. All right, now, let's go quickly to, I'm going to go quickly to this clip here. And then we'll talk briefly about South Carolina. We may talk more about South Carolina tomorrow because we run out of time here. But I wanted to cover this information. Okay, hold on. I wanted to cover this information because this is crucial what's taking place. And we're being attacked with the laws. And we're being attacked not just at the federal level, the attacks coming, but Democrats are in the control of the House of Representatives, so a lot of stuff they can shut down. but we're being attacked at the state level, and Republicans control the majority of the state legislatures. Okay, see, Republicans control the majority of the state legislatures. There's let me see. There was a graphic from the Readout, Joanne Reed, MSNBC, and I forgot how many state legislatures. I think it's 31 or something like that. State legislatures that Republicans control. I'll pull up this graphic here in just a second. All right, we'll pull that up. Let me continue with this quickly here, and then we'll go to this clip. Critical race theory is a practice. It's an approach to grappling with a history of white supremacy that rejects the belief that what's in the past is in the past. Okay, because people, we hear all the time, they tell us get over it. Okay, well, the reason why they want to tell us to get over it is because they got over on us. And they don't want us to figure out like exactly what happened and how it happened. The reason why they tell us to get over it is because they got over on us. They tell us to move on. Okay. Well, you maldistributed wealth, power, and resources into the hands of white society. So it's easy to move on when you have something to move with. Critical race theorists believe that racism is an everyday experience for most people of color, and that a large part of society has no interest in doing away with it because it benefits white elites. A large part of society has no interest in doing away with racism because it benefits white elites. Well, it benefits white people in general, to tell you the truth. One way or another, even white people who are against racism. Okay. Many also believe that American institutions are racist, and that dealing with systemic racism. We're not talking about a feeling. Racism has nothing. Let me say this: racism has nothing to do with not liking people or calling people racial epithets or something like that. That's bigotry. Oftentimes, people get confused, and then they say, "Oh, well, you know, you have some African Americans; they hate white people, so they're just as racist as white people." That's not racism. That's bigotry. Racism is a power structure. That's something entirely different. So we can't be confused about what it is that we're talking about, because you can't address the problem if you misdefine the problem. All right, now. So critical race theory, okay, so many also believe that American institutions are racist and that people are privileged or oppressed because of their race. While the theory was started as a way to examine how laws and systems promote inequality, it has since expanded. Critical race theory attends not only to law's transformative role, which is often celebrated, but also to its role in establishing the very rights and privileges that legal reform was set to dismantle. But also to its role in establishing the very rights and privileges that legal reform was set to dismantle. Like American history itself, a proper understanding of the ground upon which we stand requires a balanced assessment, not a simplistic commitment to jingoistic accounts of our nation's past and current dynamics. Okay, so check out the rest of this. They go on to talk more about the history of critical race theory, and going back before it was even called that, and going back to the works of civil rights activists such as Dr. W. Du Bois and Fannie Lou Hamer, etc. Okay, read this article here from CNN.com by Faith Karami. What critical race theory is and isn't. What critical race theory is and isn't. This is from May 10th, 2021. All right, I want to. We talked about this last week. This interview that Dr. Mark Lamont Hill did with Dr. Imani Perry from Princeton University. Okay, and she's a professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. She's an expert on critical race theory as well. And the day before he did this interview, I think it was May 5th, 2021. The day before, he had former Georgia State Representative Vernon Jones on his show. Vernon Jones was a Democrat, became a Republican. He's a Trump lover. He's an idiot, Vernon Jones. Vernon Jones cannot explain what the hell critical race theory is. Now, Vernon Jones is running for governor of Georgia. Okay, he's not going to beat Stacey Abrams. And he's running on the platform that if he is elected governor of Georgia, he's going to sign an executive order to ban critical race theory. But when he was interviewed by Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill gave him a number of chances to explain exactly what critical race theory is. Vernon Jones had no idea. He just knows white people are against it. Now, they briefly define critical race theory here. Critical race theory is a legal analysis on the premise that race is a social construct and that is used to oppress people of color rather than a natural biological feature. All right. I want to go to this interview here that Dr. Mark Lamont Hill did with Dr. Imani Perry dealing with critical race theory. Let's see here. Okay, let's go to this. Let's go to this interview.
Anyway, so I decided to get someone on the show tonight who is an actual expert on critical race theory and much more. This way, we can all understand what critical race theory is about and how we can develop a better judgment about the current push to ban it from schools in the red states. So joining me now is Dr. Imani Perry, professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. Professor Perry, I'll say Dr. Perry. I know they say PhDs come a dime a dozen. I don't buy that. So I'm going to say your expertise matters. And I'm going to ask you very clearly, what is critical race theory?
Okay.
What is critical race theory, Doc?
Thank you for having me. So the most straightforward way to explain critical race theory is to begin with the civil rights movement, right? So the victories of the movement, which we all know, are found in federal legislation, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, but also in anti-discrimination law, essentially laws that declared Jim Crow policies unconstitutional. So after that moment, we begin to understand, of course, that Black people suffered many other forms of injury and had many systems of disadvantagement and inequality in their lives, right? And so legislatures and municipalities and organizations began to make specific efforts to target African Americans with programs to address current and past discrimination. And they faced a major conservative backlash. And the way that backlash was formed was saying, well, if you make programs to target the discrimination experienced by Black Americans and you don't include me, white person, then you are discriminating against me, right? And so they begin to attack programs like affirmative action and upward bound, et cetera. And the Supreme Court of the United States then really fails the civil rights movement by basically treating targeted programs to address racial inequality as the same form of discrimination as Jim Crow laws, right? That they are both are subject to immediate scrutiny, the strictest scrutiny. So we get to this point, and then civil rights lawyers and scholars begin to talk about how we have to be able to address subordination, injustice, not just color consciousness. It's not enough to be colorblind. We actually have to be able to address injustice and subordination if we're going to have legal racial equality. And that's the heart of critical race theory. How to think about law, legislation, policies that will substantively respond to racial inequality. And they began to bring multiple forms of analysis to the table: history, narrative, gender, class, showing all the insidious ways that discrimination and inequality have been sedimented in American society, right? And then it blooms in multiple directions, but it is literally just a way of understanding
the mechanics of racial inequality, and how the law might be imagined to address them. Nothing more than that.
It's an important thing that you talked about, and you laid that out brilliantly. It doesn't really need any addendum by me. But you talked about this other issue of color blindness, which is an important thing, right? Because critical race theory has always rejected liberal colorblind theory. Ironically, because it's always accused of being this wild liberal theory, but in many ways, critical race theory said, hey, wait a minute. Colorblindness as the goal, as a social aspiration, is also problematic. We need to actually think about race. Doesn't mean that we obsess about race, doesn't mean that we prioritize one race over the other per se, but we need to think about race as another factor here.
Right. If you want to address inequality, you have to have data. In order to have data, you have to pay attention to where people from different segments of society are situated. You have to be able to look at the relationships between race and health outcomes, race and class, race and educational outcomes, right? And so if you are colorblind, and we have examples in other nations, Germany might be an example, where if you don't actually keep track of race, you have no mechanisms for addressing racial injustice. That is absolutely untenable in this country that has been organized from the outset around racial inequality. So it's a really, it's a problematic form of legal interpretation. But if we go a step further, if we can't even talk about it in schools, right, it actually has the potential to diminish our young people's ability to be sort of active civic participants, to understand the world they occupy and hopefully build a better society.
Speaking of schools, this whole hullabaloo began because Republican legislators said, we will not allow critical race theory to be taught in schools. Now, I used to teach high school. I've studied schools. I know people in school. I want to know where these schools are, where people are teaching all this critical race theory. This feels like a solution in search of a problem.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so this is a kind of conventional right-wing approach where they create a moral panic around an issue that actually doesn't really exist, right? And we can see a comparable move right now in targeting trans teens, right? They they sort of make up a problem and then drum up a lot of anxiety and a moral panic around it as a way to detract attention from their own failed policies and agendas. And unfortunately, because we have a society in which it's easy to ignite a variety of bigotries, they get a lot of traction out of it. But yes, I have taught critical race theory when I taught law school. I taught it many times. I am not aware of it being taught in high schools at all, in K-12 education, and only very rarely in college. I mean, it's not a kind of mainstream. It's not like teaching African American studies. It's not teaching teaching the civil rights movement. It's a very kind of niche field that is largely in law schools and in schools of education at this point, graduate schools of education.
So, right. So this is a sort of interesting moment here. Then, so when they attack critical race theory, it seems like a cynical move. Then they don't know what it means clearly, but they also don't need to know what it means because it seems to be a code for something else.
It's a code for something, and they're also banking on the fact that the general public doesn't know what it means, and that's okay because it's not really a mainstream theory, right? And so they're drumming up anxiety. And it becomes very difficult for those who disagree with them to even engage, because who knows what critical race theory means besides, academics, frankly, and some lawyers, right? So I do think it's cynical. But on the other hand, I do think there's one piece that is very important to be mindful of. It is really clear that they are outraged at the idea that we would teach the history of the nation in an authentic way, with all of the details of the injustice, of the violence, of the inequality, of all of the isms. That is seen as a problem to them. They want to maintain the fiction of this country, the mythology of this country, and that's something that we do have to be very deliberate about responding to, because we want our kids to be raised with deep and meaningful knowledge.
So ultimately, when they say they don't want critical race theory in school, they really don't want race talk in school. They don't want a racial history in school. They don't want any kind of critical analysis of white supremacy in school.
Right. And I say, yes, all of that, but also they don't want a basically honest history of this nation. right? I mean, you don't have to have a critical analysis to know that slavery was wrong or that Jim Crow was unjust, right? That's not a deep analysis. I mean, a 5-year-old can understand that those things are unjust. So it's very alarming. I think we have to respond to it, but we cannot be held to their terms because their terms are deceptive.
Professor Imani Perry from Princeton University, thank you for giving us an expert analysis of critical race theory and making this plain. Appreciate you. All right, y'all.
All right, so that was Dr. Mark Lamont Hill on the Black News Channel interviewing Princeton professor of African American Studies, Dr. Imani Perry. All right, you can check that out on YouTube. Princeton professor explains critical race theory with Mark Lamont Hill. That's from the Black News Channel on YouTube. We'll post a link here. Excellent interview. It's a problem in search. It's a solution in search of a problem. 1, 2. There's no widespread effort to teach critical race theory in high schools or anything like that. It's taught at the college level. It's taught either at the graduate level or in law school. So it's not really taught a lot in colleges either. So you just have a lot of Republicans freaking out, trying to galvanize support around banning critical race theory. And it's not even a big effort to teach it in schools. Okay. Let's see here. So let's switch gears. I want to talk about the Charleston, South Carolina Race Riot of 1919. Charleston, South Carolina Race Riot of 1919. It started May 10th, 1919. Okay. And at the Zen Education Project, they have a piece on it there. Just a second here. The Zen Education Project, they have a piece on it also at blackpast.org. Let me pull this up here from the Zen Education Project. Okay, hold on just a second here. So 1919 was, we know this is the year after the great pandemic started, also known as the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. And this is the year after World War I ends also. You're going to have about 25 major race riots across the country in 1919. 1919 is known as the Red Summer. The Red Summer. It was named the Red Summer by James Weldon Johnson of the NAACP, James Weldon Johnson, who also wrote the lyrics to Lift Every Voice and Sing in 1899. But it's called the Red Summer because he said the streets of America were flowing with blood. So very quickly here, if we look at this information from the Zen Education Project dealing with the Red Summer, then I'll share a little background information about the Red Summer, because the Red Summer takes place during the beginning of the Great Migration also, which starts about 1915. So May 10th, 1919, Charleston white mob riot, also known as the South Carolina Race Riot of 1919. White sailors ignited violent rioting in Charleston, South Carolina on May 10th, 1919, during what would become known as the Red Summer. Reports from the night pinpoint a few events that helped spark the citywide terror. One group of white sailors ran down an African-American man who had not stepped off the sidewalk for them. Another group killed an African-American man at a pool hall after a bootlegger reportedly took their cash. but did not return with the promised alcohol. When rumors of these incidents reached the Charleston Navy Yard, hundreds of white sailors flooded into Black Charleston neighborhoods to wreak havoc. Civil rights activist Septima Clark was a young woman living in Charleston, South Carolina at the time. In an interview, she described the scene on May 10th, 1919. She said, "We had trolley cars then, and these sailors got on and started beating every Black person they could find. They killed one or two of them. That Sunday night, nobody could go out. You had to stay in." There's a interview with the Charleston Chronicle where she's quoted. Now, yet many Black people did not stay indoors. In fact, many fought back. Some armed themselves. We have a history of fighting back as well. And they talk about the article. They cite the article from blackpast.org as well. Several killed. We look at this article here from the El Paso Herald, May 12, 1919. El Paso Herald, May 12, 1919. Several killed in race riot at Charleston, South Carolina. 2 sailors and 4 Negroes were reported to have been killed, and a number of persons wounded. 8 severely wounded. Okay, 8 severely wounded in a race riot which broke out here late Saturday night. The trouble was said to have grown out of the shooting of a sailor by a Negro in a downtown pool room. For several hours, the rioters had almost complete possession of the downtown streets. Trolley cars were stopped and Negro passengers removed. Okay, so check this out from the Zen Education Project. Let's flip over and look at the one from blackpast.org in just a second. But I want to look at some background information here on the Red Summer of 1919. And this also ties it to the Great Migration. Let me see, do we have Great Migration information? Okay, we'll do it the Red Summer. So this is from, this slide is from a lecture I do, Black Migration 1619 to 2019, Black Migration 1619 to 2019. That lecture is available at my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We also have Black Migration 1619 to 2019 DVD. It's a 6 DVD bundle pack also at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right. Hey, Ruby, I never got your email. All right. So the Red Summer 1919 marked the culmination of steadily growing tensions surrounding the Great Migration of African Americans from the rural South to the cities of the North that took place during World War I. Okay, it took place during World War I. When the war ended in late 1918, thousands of servicemen, U.S. servicemen, returned home from fighting in Europe to find that their jobs in factories, warehouses, and mills had been filled by newly arrived Southern African Americans or immigrants. So when these white men, there's about 5 million white men that served in World War I from the U.S., served in World War I. When they left to go fight in the war, they left jobs behind. When they came back, those jobs were being filled by African Americans who moved from the South up north and by immigrants as well. So a lot of these white men came back, couldn't find jobs. All right. And this is going to set off over 25 major race riots across the country in the summer of 1919. When the war ended in late 1918, thousands of servicemen returned home from fighting in Europe to find that their jobs in the factories, warehouses, and mills had been filled by newly arrived Southern African Americans or immigrants. Amid financial insecurity, racial and ethnic prejudices ran rampant. Amid financial insecurity, racial and ethnic prejudices ran rampant. Meanwhile, African American veterans who had risked their lives fighting for the causes of freedom and democracy found themselves denied basic rights such as adequate housing and equality under the law, leading them to become increasingly militant. Okay. So you're going to see us fighting back as well. And then there's an article from history.com, official website of the History Channel, that deals with Black GIs fighting back during the Red Summer of 1919. I've done a presentation on this before, this topic. There's an article from history.com that deals with this here. Red Summer of 1919, how Black World War I veterans fought back against racist mobs. This is by Abigail Higgins, July 26, 2019. Red Summer of 1919, how Black World War I veterans fought back against racist mobs. Because we have a history of fighting back, okay? So check that out. That gives some more background information on the Red Summer. And I have the lecture that I've done, Black Migration 1619 to 2019. I talk about the Red Summer a lot in that one. And I also deal with the race riot in 1919 in Chicago during the Red Summer. Okay, but if we look at this briefly here from blackpast.org, Charleston, South Carolina, Race Riot 1919. Report 6 killed in Sailor Negro riot. 6 killed in Sailor Negro riot. Other persons are wounded. 8 severely in a race clash at Charleston, South Carolina. Now, the race riot of Charleston, South Carolina in 1919 was part of a series of race riots that year known as the Red Summer. The migration of African Americans out of the South, the end of World War I, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the illness and near incapacity of President Woodrow Wilson, and the 1918 influenza epidemic, also known as the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, that killed more than 600,000 Americans, killed about 675,000 Americans, killed about 50 million to 100 million people worldwide. This led to widespread social instability. All these factors led to widespread social instability. The events led to fears of social and political upheaval, which contributed to racial tensions and violence as whites sought scapegoats and African Americans, emboldened by their own progress, sought to defend their rights. Because see, a lot of these brothers went to go fight in the war. They learned how to fight, how to kill in the war. And when they came back home, you have what's known as the new Negro. It was a new concept. It was a new self-identity. They were known as race men. And it was known as the new Negro. And these were men that were very proud of their race. And these brothers are coming back home to fight against the Jim Crow laws and segregation and things like this. And they were saying, we want all of our rights now. Not 50 years from now, not 100 years from now. We want all of our rights now. We fought for this country. We bled for this country. We died for this country in the war. Coming back home, they said, we're not going to deal with this segregation and all this the Jim Crow that we were dealing with previously. We want all of our rights now. These brothers come back home, and now they know how to fight because they were in the military. So they're using those military skills to defend their communities from white supremacists who are attacking them. These events led to fears of social and political upheaval, contributed to racial tensions and violence as whites sought scapegoats for the economy and why they couldn't find jobs and things like this. And African Americans, emboldened by their own progress, sought to defend their rights. At the time of the riot, Charleston, South Carolina, was a city of 80,000, more than half of whom were African American. On the evening of May 10th, 1919, an African American man allegedly pushed Roscoe Coleman. Okay, an African American man allegedly pushed Roscoe Coleman, a white Navy sailor, off the sidewalk. A white crowd of sailors and civilians gave chase to the African American man who had escaped to a nearby house. A scuffle ensued where both sides threw bricks, bottles, and stones until 4 shots were fired into the air by an African American man to disperse the crowd. Rumors immediately began to circulate of a sailor shot by a Negro, quote unquote, shot by a Negro. Now, rioting by white sailors, civilians, and a few soldiers and Marines soon began. The multiplicity of the crowd makeup adding further chaos and hysteria to the scene. A mob of sailors stole rifles from nearby gun clubs and began shooting African Americans indiscriminately while robbing and vandalizing African American homes along the way. Okay, because there's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of jealousy that some white people had, because, see, once again, African Americans are moving up north, and also even the ones that didn't move up north, a lot of them are getting jobs in some factories because these white men went to the war and left jobs behind. So a lot of these jobs are being filled by African Americans and immigrants. But even up north, what you're going to find is during World War I, you're going to find factories and corporations up north. They're marketing to African Americans in the South who are sharecroppers and working in agriculture, things like this. They're marketing to them in the South to come up north and get these jobs and have a better way of life and get out the mud, get out the dirt, things like this. This is all during the early years of the Great Migration, which is 1915 to about 1970. Now, African Americans fought back using firearms of their own. The rioting continued around 3 a.m. when Charleston's mayor requested a detachment of U.S. Marines to restore order. In all, 5 white men and 18 African American men were seriously injured, and 3 African American men, William Brown, Isaac Doctor, and James Talbot, died of gunshot wounds. The subsequent Navy investigation stands as one of the very few official documents regarding white racial violence during the era where the white perpetrators were named and their crimes identified. The report found sailors Ralph Stone, George W. Biggs, Roscoe Coleman, Robert Morton, and white civilian resident Alexander Lanou were responsible for stirring up strife and inciting others to violence against the Negroes. In addition, it found Jacob Cohen and George T. Holliday, both sailors, jointly responsible for the death of Isaac Doctor. Finally, it declared that all property damage, except a pool room, and all injuries to Negro men was caused by the unlawful actions of mobs, which in all cases were comprised principally of sailors. However, typical of white mob violence in the United States at the time, very little punishment was meted out. Very little punishment was handed out. Despite the thorough and objective investigation and its naming of culprits, and despite the Navy's full authority to hand out harsh sentences, then standard for misconduct, Coyne and Holliday received only 1 year in military prison as punishment, and no other sailors, soldiers, Marines, or civilians were convicted of any unlawful acts. All right, so that's some background history dealing with the Charleston, South Carolina Race Riot 1919. Okay, hey, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. We're here 6 days a week. We're Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time. And then also Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the African History Network Show. On 9:10 a.m., the Superstation WFDF in Detroit. The first hour of our show, we're on 9:10 Monday through Friday, and then we continue here on social media. You can still register for the online course that I teach also on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, where they didn't teach you in school. And we deal with thousands of years of history, and we deal with what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. When you do it through Cash App, be sure to type in $ the AHN Show, SHOW. If you don't, click on the link, and it'll show my name. It'll say Michael and have a picture of me there. $ the AHN Show. If somebody set up a fake Cash App account for the African History Network, that's not mine. So be sure to type in $ the AHN Show, SHOW. And we posted a link here also. You can register for the online course that I teach. It's Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. And we deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. It's Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We do the classes live. You can join us in class live. All the sessions are recorded, so you can go back and watch it over and over again also. So the class is regularly $130, is on sale $80. We posted the link here, and it's also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. So next class is Saturday, May 15th, 2021. So we'll see you in class. Look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you tomorrow night. Peace.